Welcome to 3-Minute History with Mr. Marr. Quick summaries about a range of different history topics. Today we're going back to one of the major events of the Cold War, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was an event that brought the world arguably closer than it's ever otherwise been to an all-out nuclear war, and took place in 1962. Before we consider this though, let's look at what happened before the crisis. In the late 1950s, America and Cuba began to have real problems in their relationship. The dictator of Cuba, a man called Batista, had been supported by America, but he was ultimately removed from power in the Cuban Revolution by a group led by Fidel Castro and featuring, amongst others, people like Che Guevara. Castro's government took a range of actions which were popular with the Cuban people but angered America, and this included taking land from American businesses and redistributing it to Cuban peasants. As a result of this, America and Cuba ultimately split their relations. America refused to buy any products from Cuba, including sugar, which was the main product that was sold by the Cubans. This caused huge financial problems. America also refused to sell things such as oil or weapons to Cuba. As a result of this, Cuba and the Soviet Union then began to build a relationship, and this was where the problem began. The Cubans were worried that they would be attacked by America. This was partly because America had tried to move Fidel Castro from power, including at the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. Because of this, the Soviets agreed that they would provide a degree of military protection to Cuba, and they placed nuclear weapons in Cuba. In October 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba and spotted the nuclear sites. This led to major problems as America demanded that the Soviet Union remove those missiles from Cuba, but they failed to do so. America at this point imposed what was known as a quarantine on Cuba, which was that they would refuse to let any ships approach Cuba unless they agreed to otherwise be inspected. At this point, both sides came close to war. The American Navy took actions such as dropping depth charges on Soviet submarines, and at the same time, the Soviets shot down an American plane. Tensions were incredibly high. One wrong move could potentially have seen one side launch a nuclear attack that the other would have responded to. Both sides were incredibly scared about the prospect of a nuclear war which could have killed tens of millions of people, and as a result of this they took actions to stop the crisis. Behind the scenes, the Americans and the Soviets were involved in a range of discussions, although publicly their leaders were expressing otherwise. Eventually, and fortunately, the Soviets agreed that they would remove their nuclear weapons from Cuba, ultimately ending the tension. Secretly, the Americans had also agreed that they would do the same to their nuclear weapons, which were in Turkey and Italy. And later on, both sides reached a number of other agreements to try and keep the peace, including a nuclear test ban treaty and also the establishment of a hotline which would allow Moscow and Washington to speak directly to one another.